On May 26, 1986, at exactly 10:45 in the morning, a man named Michel Vaujour stood in the middle of a hallway in one of the most secure places on Earth and realized he was holding his life in his right hand. He was surrounded. There were heavy steel doors behind him, armed guards in front of him, and sniper towers above him. If he made a single wrong move, he would be riddled with bullets within seconds. Michel was a hardened criminal, a man they called the King of Escapes. But on this day, he didn't have a machine gun. He didn't have a team of mercenaries. He didn't even have a knife. Michel Vaujour was holding a nectarine. Yeah, a piece of fruit. He had painted it green with a child's watercolor set to make it look like a grenade. And he was betting his entire existence on the hope that the terrified guards staring at him wouldn't notice the difference. He pulled the imaginary pin with his teeth, held the fruit high in the air, and screamed that he would blow the entire prison block to hell if they didn't open the gates. But this isn't even the craziest part of this story, because while Michel was bluffing his way through the prison corridors with a painted nectarine, a woman named Nadine was 500 feet in the air fighting against strong crosswinds, piloting a helicopter she had barely learned how to fly. She wasn't a criminal mastermind, she was a housewife. She had never flown a combat mission in her life. She was just a woman so blinded by love that she decided to declare war on the French justice system to get her husband back. This is the story of the most insane, romantic, and impossible prison break in the history of France. It is a story about how a piece of fruit and a determined wife made a mockery of a maximum security fortress. But before the helicopter lands on the roof, and before the guards realize that they're being held hostage by produce, we have to understand why this escape was supposed to be impossible. To understand the sheer madness of what Michel Vaujour was attempting, you have to look at the monster he was trying to escape from. This wasn't a countryside jail with a sleepy sheriff. This was La Santé Prison. Located in the very heart of Paris, La Sante is a fortress of stone and iron that has stood since 1867. It was built to break men. The architecture itself is designed to crush the human spirit. It is built in a star shape, a design known as the panopticon, meaning that from the central rotunda, the guards can see down every single corridor at once. That means there's no blind spots, there's no shadows to hide in, the walls are thick, the windows are barred with reinforced steel, and the perimeter is patrolled by police who are authorized to shoot on sight. For over a century, La Sante had a reputation. You check in, but you don't check out until your sentence is over, or you're dead. It was a place where they kept the worst of the worst: terrorists, assassins, and the most dangerous gangsters in Europe. And in 1986, Michel Vaujour was right at the top of that list. But Michel was not your average thug. To understand why he would try something as ridiculous as a fruit grenade, you have to look at his past. This wasn't his first time making the police look like idiots. In fact, escaping was his specialty. 7 years earlier, in 1979, Michel had pulled off an escape that was already legendary in the French underworld. He had been on trial, standing in a crowded courtroom surrounded by police. Most men would have accepted their fate. Michel, however, had spent days in his cell carving a bar of soap. He sculpted it into the perfect shape of a pistol. He used shoe polish to turn the white soap into black steel. In the middle of the trial, he pulled out the soap gun. He didn't just threaten the guards, he grabbed the judge, the actual magistrate presiding over his case, and held the weapon to her head. The entire courtroom froze. The police, afraid of hitting the judge, lowered their guns. They watched in horror as Michel walked out of the courthouse, holding the most powerful person in the room hostage with a bathroom toiletry. He vanished into the city, leaving the French justice system humiliated. He had escaped with a piece of soap. So when he looked at a nectarine in 1986, he didn't see a snack. He saw a weapon of mass destruction. But this time, the stakes were different. He wasn't in a courtroom. He was in the isolation wing of La Sante. He was facing a sentence of 28 years. 28 years, I mean, that's a lifetime. It's a sentence designed to make a man lose hope. But Michel Vaujour didn't lose hope. He got angry, and he had a secret weapon that the prison authorities had completely overlooked. His wife, Nadine. Nadine Vaujour was not a pilot. She was a woman in love. She was small, quiet, and by all accounts, completely ordinary. But when Michel was locked up this time, something broke inside of her. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing him only through a glass partition for the rest of her life. During their brief visits, speaking in a coded language they had developed over the years to avoid the guards' suspicion, Michel whispered a plan to her. It was a plan so reckless that any sane person would have walked away. He didn't want to dig a tunnel. He didn't want to bribe a guard. He wanted to go up. He wanted to go to the roof. Imagine the conversation. Michel sitting in a visitor's booth, whispering to his wife that she, a petite woman with zero aviation experience, needed to go out, rent a helicopter, and fly it into the center of Paris, hovering it over a prison filled with snipers. Most people would have said no, or asked, "Are you crazy?" But Nadine simply asked, "When?" This is where the story shifts from a crime drama to a testament of sheer human will. Nadine began taking helicopter flying lessons. She enrolled in a flight school in the suburbs of Paris under a fake name, Lena Rigon. She didn't tell her instructors why, of course. She was just an enthusiastic student. But every time she got in that cockpit, she wasn't looking at the scenery. She was calculating. She was learning how to hover. She was learning how to handle the stick when the adrenaline was pumping. Flying a helicopter is incredibly difficult. It requires the simultaneous use of both hands and both feet. It is a physically exhausting and mentally draining thing to do. Nadine was terrified. She knew that she was training for a suicide mission here. If she crashed, they would both die. If she was too slow, the snipers would kill her. She had to become an expert pilot in a matter of months. There were days when she wanted to quit. The instructors were tough on her. They didn't know that this quiet woman was planning the crime of the century. They just thought she was a slow learner. She struggled with the complex controls of the Alouette 2 helicopter, a machine that is unforgiving to novices. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought of Michel in his concrete box, and she got back into the cockpit. By May 1986, she had her license, and she was ready. Meanwhile, inside the walls of La Sante, Michel was preparing his arsenal. He didn't have access to guns or explosives. The guards checked his cell constantly. But he did have access to food. He managed to save a few nectarines from his meals. To you and me, a nectarine is a sweet snack. To Michel Vaujour, it was the key to the front door. Or the roof door in this case. He used art supplies, likely smuggled in or acquired through the prison hobby program, to paint the round fruit a dark military green. He fashioned a small piece of metal or stiff cardboard to look like the pin and the lever of a grenade. In the dim light of a prison corridor held by a man with a desperate look in his eyes, a painted nectarine looks exactly like a fragmentation grenade. It was a bluff of epic proportions. Michel was essentially bringing a fruit salad to a gunfight. The date was set for May 26th. It was a Monday. Mondays in prison are usually a little slow. The guards are recovering from the weekend shifts. Michel had also crafted a fake pistol, just like in 1979, but this time it was carved from wood or soap and painted with the same dark polish. He knew the drill. At 10:45 a.m., the plan went into motion. Michel was being escorted through the hallway. He waited for the precise moment when they passed a specific gate. Suddenly, he moved. He pulled out his fake gun and the grenades. He grabbed the nearest guard, jamming the hard barrel of the fake pistol into the man's ribs. "Don't move or we all die," Michel screamed. He held up the green nectarine, his thumb hovering over the fake pin. "I'll pull it! I swear to God, I'll pull it!" The psychology of this moment is fascinating. The guards were trained to deal with violence, but they were human. They had families. They saw a desperate man holding a grenade, and they froze. Panic is contagious. Michel used that panic like a weapon. He shoved the guards forward, forcing them to unlock the doors leading to the administration wing. But Michel wasn't alone. He had recruited an accomplice, another prisoner named Pierre Hernandez. Pierre was desperate too. He wanted out. He had agreed to join Michel on this insane run to the roof. Together, they moved through the corridors, a two-man army armed with fruit and fake guns. They reached the final checkpoint. More guards, more guns. Michel waved the fruit in the air like a madman. "Open the door! Open it now!" The guards hesitated. They had orders to never open the secure gates during a hostage situation, but Michel was screaming that he would blow the whole wall down. The fear of immediate death overrode their training. The heavy steel bolts clanked open. Michel Vaujour and Pierre Hernandez burst out onto the roof of the isolation wing. This was it. They were exposed. The guards below in the courtyard looked up and saw them. The alarm sirens began to wail, a deafening mechanical scream that echoed through the entire 14th arrondissement of Paris. Snipers in the watchtowers swiveled their rifles, and they saw two men on the roof. They had the green light to shoot, but then the sun was blocked out, because at that exact moment, the sound of rotor blades began to chop the air above Paris. Nadine was coming. She was flying a white Alouette 2 helicopter. It's a light, maneuverable machine, but flying low over a city is a nightmare. There are power lines, antennas, and unpredictable wind currents caused by the buildings. And she wasn't just flying over the city, she was flying into restricted airspace. The air traffic controllers were already screaming on the radio, asking her what she was doing. She ignored them. Her eyes were fixed on the star-shaped roof of La Sante. She descended like a hawk. Nadine was fighting the controls. The prison roof was not a helipad. It was cluttered with chimneys and vents. There was barely enough room to fit the skids of the helicopter. If she clipped a rotor blade on a chimney, the helicopter would flip and explode, killing everyone. The wind from the rotors whipped up dust and debris, blinding the guards below. This chaos was actually their savior. The guards in the towers were confused. They saw the helicopter and hesitated. Was it a police helicopter landing? Was it a rescue team? By the time they realized it was the getaway vehicle, it was too late to take a clean shot without risking hitting the pilot or the rotor assembly, which could send the entire chopper crashing down into the populated prison yard. Michel saw the helicopter hovering just a few feet above the roof. The skid was slippery. He didn't wait for a perfect landing, he just ran, and he jumped. He grabbed the landing skid of the helicopter. He hauled himself up, the wind tearing at his clothes. He threw himself into the cabin next to his wife. But in the chaos, something went wrong. Pierre Hernandez, the accomplice, hesitated. Maybe he slipped. Maybe the helicopter was moving too much, but maybe it was just the fear that paralyzed him. As the helicopter began to lift, Pierre was still on the roof. He tried to reach out, but the gap was widening. Michel looked back, but there was nothing he could do. If they waited for one more second, the snipers would find their range. "Go," Michel yelled to Nadine. Pierre Hernandez was left behind on the roof, surrounded by armed guards watching his ticket to freedom fly away. It was a brutal split-second decision that would haunt them both. But survival has no conscience. Nadine pulled the collective stick up, the helicopter lurched upwards, away from the roof, away from the snipers, and away from the stone walls of La Sante. They were airborne, they were free, but the escape wasn't quite over yet. They were now a slow-moving target in the middle of the French capital. The police radio was exploding with activity. Helicopter escape at La Sante. All units alert. Police cars were scrambling on the streets below, sirens blazing, trying to follow the aircraft. Nadine flew low. She knew she couldn't outrun a police jet, but she could use the city to hide. She weaved behind buildings, heading for a nearby soccer field at the Cité Universitaire. This was the second part of the plan. They had to ditch the chopper before the Air Force scrambled jets to shoot them down. She set the helicopter down on the grass of the soccer field. Students and bystanders stared in shock as a helicopter landed in the middle of their campus and a man and a woman jumped out. A car was waiting for them. They scrambled into it and peeled away, leaving the empty helicopter and the fruit grenades behind. For a moment, they had won. They were the most famous couple in France. The media went wild. It was the perfect story. The daring thief and the devoted wife. It was romantic, it was anti-establishment. The French public, who have a historical soft spot for rebels, were practically cheering. Michel Vaujour had proven once again that stone walls do not a prison make. But reality is not a movie. In a movie, the credits roll as they drive into the sunset. In real life, the manhunt begins. For months, Michel and Nadine lived like hunted animals. They were on every wanted poster in the country. The pressure was immense. You have to understand the stress of this lifestyle. They couldn't trust anyone. They couldn't stay in one place for more than a few days. The happily ever after they had fought for was actually a nightmare of paranoia. They needed money to survive, to buy fake passports, to maybe leave the country for good, and that need for money would be their undoing. Michel was a robber. This was his trade. When you're a fugitive and you need cash fast, you go back to what you know. 4 months after the escape, in September 1986, the police got a tip. They tracked the couple to a branch of the Crédit Lyonnais bank in the Paris region. Michel and 2 accomplices were planning a robbery to fund their run. But the police were ready this time. They weren't going to be fooled by fruit. They brought heavy firepower. The confrontation was brutal. It wasn't a smooth operation like the escape. It was a chaotic, bloody shootout. The police surrounded the building, bullets flew through the air, shattering glass and tearing through metal. Michel tried to escape, but there was nowhere to go. During the exchange of fire, tragedy struck. The police weren't aiming for his legs. They were shooting to stop him. A bullet struck Michel Vaujour directly in the head. He collapsed onto the pavement. The firefight ended in silence. Nadine was arrested nearby, screaming as she watched her husband's body being loaded into an ambulance. It looked like the end. The king of escape had finally been stopped. The news reported that he was in a coma, likely brain dead. The story was over. The bullet had entered his skull and ravaged his brain. Doctors told the police that if he survived, which was a 1 in a million chance, he would be a vegetable. He would never walk, talk, or think again. Nadine was thrown into prison, facing years for the helicopter hijacking. Her sacrifice seemed to be for nothing. But let's remember that this is Michel Vaujour, the man who refuses to accept reality. He lay in a hospital bed, a bullet lodged in his brain. Doctors said he was gone. But Michel's brain didn't play by the rules, just like Michel himself. He woke up. He didn't just wake up, he remembered who he was. He couldn't speak at first, half his body was paralyzed. He was a prisoner in his own skin, trapped in a body that wouldn't obey him, but he was alive. They sent him back to prison. Not just any prison, but the darkest, deepest solitary confinement unit in France. They were terrified he would try to escape again, even in a wheelchair. They locked him away in silence. And in that silence, a new transformation happened. Michel Vaujour, the man who had spent his life running from walls, finally had to face himself. He couldn't run, he couldn't fight, so he went inward. He began to practice yoga, he began to meditate, he read philosophy. He realized the greatest prison wasn't La Sante, it was his own need for adrenaline and crime. He spent 17 years in solitary confinement. 17 years. That's the kind of torture that breaks the mind. But Michel used it to rebuild his brain. He taught himself to speak again. He visualized his paralyzed limbs moving until they actually moved. He escaped the paralysis just like he escaped his cell. And what about Nadine? She served her time, but the tragedy of their story is that the very act that proved their love, the escape, was the thing that ultimately destroyed their life together. The trauma, the prison time, the brain injury, it was all too much. They separated. The romantic dream ended, but the bond of what they did that day still remains. But this story has one final, unbelievable twist. While Michel was still in prison recovering, another woman fell in love with him. Her name was Jamila. She was a law student who began writing to him. And would you believe it? Jamila decided she wanted to break him out, too. She actually learned the flight paths. In 1993, history began to repeat itself in a way that defies belief. Jamila decided to take a shortcut. She hijacked a helicopter. She walked out onto an airfield, pulled a gun on a pilot, and ordered him to fly to the prison where Michel was being held. She planned to rip Michel out of his cell just like Nadine did 7 years earlier. But this time, the authorities were ready. They had installed anti-helicopter wires over the prison yards, high-tension cables designed to slice rotors apart. The pilot flew Jamila to the prison, but he couldn't get close enough. The alarm sounded, police swarmed the area, Jamila was arrested before she could get Michel out. Michel watched from his cell window. He saw the commotion, he knew what happened. He knew another woman had sacrificed her freedom for him, and it broke him. For the first time in his life, Michel stopped trying to escape the walls. He realized that the real prison wasn't the concrete around him. It was the cycle of violence and adrenaline that he had been trapped in since he was a teenager. So he served his time. All of it. In 2003, the gates of the prison opened, and Michel Vaujour, now in his 50s, walks out. He isn't running, he isn't holding a painted fruit, he's just walking. Jamila is waiting for him, and they're still together today. If you enjoyed this Prison Break case, check out the channel. There you'll find many great stories just like this one. If you like what you see, please subscribe. I'd be very grateful, and I'll catch you next time.